Okay, next up on our agenda is Dr. Brigitte Burpo. I'm going to introduce her briefly. She's going to present her leadership tool today, which is called a Diversity, Inclusion, and Engagement Logic Model. Dr. Burpo is a native of Birmingham, Alabama, and the University of Louisville. Since 2019, she's been faculty here. She currently serves as the Assistant Dean of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for the College of Education and Human Development, as well as a clinical assistant professor in the Sports Administration program. In her current role, she has implemented a climate accountability reporting system, Champions for Diversity Employee Recognition Program in the Social Justice Library and Resource Center for members of the CEHD department to cultivate a healthy working and learning environment. Prior to joining U of L, Brigitte worked in marketing of consumer packaged goods for companies such as RJ Reynolds, didn't know that about you, yeah, Tobacco Company, Coca-Cola Refreshments, and General Mills. Brigitte's corporate background and love for sports informs her research and practice, which has influenced her passion for organizational culture and how it plays an integral role in the development of leadership and innovation. Welcome, Brigitte.
Thank you, Ramey. I appreciate that warm introduction. And thank you, Lee Gill, for your introduction as well, and for all of the things that you talked about. I'm really glad that you said what you said, because what Lee Gill talked about was strategy. He didn't just come in and hope that people just treat each other well. He put in a plan, and he strategized with that plan, and he put in resources and also emphasized to leadership that there are resources needed in order to make a plan effective and also successful. So that's what we'll talk about today. A little bit more about me again. As Ramey said, I am the Assistant Dean for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for the College of Education and Human Development, and I'm also a clinical assistant professor in sport administration. My research area is actually strategic management of resources within organizations, and I study strategic management of organizations as well. And it's always funny when I tell people that, they're like, oh, you don't do DEI? And I think that that's funny. Because people don't see diversity, equity, and inclusion as strategic management, even though DEI touches every part of every organization. So if you are for-profit, it affects not only the employees you have in your organization, but it also affects your stakeholders, your suppliers. It affects your consumers, your potential consumers. If you are nonprofit, it still affects your organization, your employees, the stakeholders, and the lives that you are hoping to work with and change. It affects education from a conceptual framework, or from a conceptual level of understanding what diversity is and what it looks like and what it is not. It is also affecting how we view each other in society. So DEI touches everything in society, but from an organizational standpoint, it is embedded in everything that we do, or it should be embedded in everything that we do. So something that I want to use as an analogy, and it's because when we think about DEI, oftentimes when people talk about DEI, they talk about it from a perspective of just a remedy for everything. So if we throw a party, this will make everyone feel included. If we make a statement, this will make everyone feel valued and included. And it oftentimes does not take on the same level of strategy that we put into our marketing plans. We don't put in the same strategy that we put into our human resource plans, even though those things should be embedded as well. So when I go to the doctor, for whatever reason, I go in, they ask a lot of questions. So several people will ask me questions by the time I actually see the doctor. So the person at the front desk who's checking me in, they ask me, why are you here today? Once I get back to the doctor's office and I sit there for about 20 minutes first, waiting, scrolling on my phone and waiting for someone to come in. When the nurse comes in, the nurse says, why are you here today? I tell them why I'm here today, what the problem is, or what my issue may be that day, and then she takes notes, and then she leaves out of the office and says, someone will be with you shortly. By the time the doctor comes in, maybe an hour later, and I am taking jabs at the healthcare system right now, But about an hour later when the doctor comes in, the doctor says, I see you're here for this problem. So tell me a little bit more about that. When did you start to see these symptoms? When did these symptoms present? When did you start to feel this way? How severe are these symptoms? Do you feel it at this time? Do you feel it at that time? What are some of the other things? And then they also ask me some questions that I haven't thought about. Have you tried doing X, Y, Z? And I bring this up because that is essentially what a plan for DEI would look like. What is the problem? Why are you here today? Are you here because you've had a lawsuit and now you're forced into changing things? Are you here because your employees are coming from a generation that demands change? Are you coming here because you see the value of having a diverse workforce or diverse consumers? These are the things that you're asking yourself when you are coming up with your diversity, equity, and inclusion plans. And so that is essentially what we'll be talking about with the DEI logic model. All right, so who has ever heard of theory of change? Okay, so who wants to, I'm a professor, so I am going to ask you all to participate. So what is theory of change? What is it? Without looking, let me go back. We'll have class today. What is theory of change? Anybody? We can take guesses. It's okay. It's a learning environment. Okay, Remy.
For something else, where somebody is in the stage of change, like, are they contemplating change? Are they actually making change? I don't know if that's what you're looking for.
Yeah, so, okay, theory of change looks at what an issue is. So it looks at what is the problem, why is the change needed, and then how will we create that change. So it has 3 steps to it. So it's identifying a problem, identifying strategies to help create the change, or what we call interventions in change management or change theory, and then assessing outcomes or identifying the intended outcome. What do you want the overall outcome to be? So again, if we're looking at why are we here, then your why are you here should tell you what the outcome you're looking for will be. So if we are here because there was a lawsuit, somebody sued you because you were making racial epithets in the office, and so because of that, your outcome should be not making racial epithets in the office, okay? Or preventing that from further action or something of that nature. So that is what theory of change looks at. Why are you here? What do you want the intended outcome to be, and how are you going to get there? So there are different reasons or different purposes of organizational change. So there is strategic change, which means that you are going to change the structure of the business, or you're going to make some sort of structural change because it is needed in order to update maybe processes, policies, or anything like that. People-centric change. So again, if you have consumers or you have employees who are saying, we are demanding change, we need to see change now. You're seeing low retention of your employees or students, for those of us who are in education, then that is considered people-centric. Structural change, technological change, unplanned change, and remedial change. So these are different types of change that takes place in different organizations, or different purposes or reasons for change. So when we look at technological change, that is, of course, updating your system. So do we have a system that works with the type of technological needs that we have in our organization? Are we updating our website so that it's user-friendly, or so that it is accessible for people who have diverse abilities? Are we doing unplanned change where something has come up, a necessary action following an unexpected event? So are you changing things because something drastic had taken place and now you need to shift? Because Lee Gill brought up our shift in our political atmosphere, have new laws come out and now you have to make an organizational change, so an unplanned organizational change. Looking at remedial changes, so again, if the problem comes up, so a lawsuit or just a potential lawsuit or a bad incident happened, then are you coming up with a remedial change, meaning there was a drastic issue and now you have to find a remedy for that. What we are going to talk about today is a structural change and strategic change. And we're going to talk about that because those are the things that really lead to more inclusive organizations. So strategic and structural changes. And this is why we need a logic model. So who has ever heard of a logic model before? Okay, what is a logic model? I do students like this all the time because they'll repeat exactly what they see. So what is a logic model?
It's basically a flow chart.
It's a flow chart. So it looks at your inputs. What are you putting into the organization? What are you putting in terms of resources? Are you putting human resources into it? Are you putting your financial resources into it? Do you have spatial resources? So we call those physical resources. Are you putting in equipment or whatever the case may be? Informational resources. These are all things. What are you putting into this effort? And then outputs are what do you want to get out of it? Or what are you putting into it? What activities are you doing in order to get to the outcomes that you want to get to? So when we look at this logic model, it's a visual representation of a program or process that outlines the inputs, activities, outputs, and outcomes associated with achieving a particular goal. And are we able to send the presentation out after this as well?
Actually, I'm going to send it out to everybody
Okay, good.
today.
Okay, so when we use logic models, this is used in order to organize how we are strategically managing one or a very broad type of initiative or new change. So when looking at organizational change, we use the logic model because it helps us organize, it helps us stay focused on what we're doing. Who has ever planned a DEI initiative and then all types of things get thrown in at the same time? Okay, so what was that like?
Well, nothing got done.
Okay, nothing gets done, right? Because you're all over the place. One piece of advice I always give people who are working on DEI is to focus on one thing at a time. And the reason why I say that is because in my first year working in DEI, I was focused on everything at the same time and I was pulling hair out by the end of the year. So in order to really have effective change and to have lasting change, it is important to focus on one thing at a time. And using a logic model, this is for one thing at a time. So you can have multiple logic models operating at one time, but each logic model needs to be focused on one particular initiative or one aspect of the organization's change. So let's dive into this diversity, inclusion, and engagement model. So with this model, it looks at pre-planning and post-planning, and it takes theory of change and it pretty much combines theory of change with the use of logic models. So you use logic models in theory of change, but this is more encompassing because, as you'll see in just a moment when I pull it up, that it looks at pre-planning and then post-assessment as well, which is an important part of making sure that the plans that you're doing, you're not just a one and done. You're also looking to see whether or not the resources that you put into those initiatives were effective. Did you plan it where the resources that you thought you needed were the resources that you actually needed? And this is also to help get more commitment from organizational leaders when you go back and say, actually, you know, we had this plan, this is what we thought we would need, but we also need X, Y, Z as well. We need more space. We need more human capital to help move these forward. So as I pick this up, start thinking about some of the things that you would like to focus on in your organizations, because we are going to practice. So everybody has one of the forms in your folder as well. But with the pre-planning process, so being mindful of, you're going to identify the problem and you're going to set a commitment. So not only are you going to say, this is what the problem is, but this is what I commit to doing in order to fix it. And that commitment is going to be what is going to guide you through the rest of the process. It's going to keep you focused on what the end goal is. You're also going to identify your inputs, the outcomes that you want, so your anticipated outcomes. This is your commitment. Why is that your commitment? What is the outcome that you want to get to? And then, how do you measure success? That's very important, Because if you don't set your success parameters early, then you won't know how to determine whether or not it was successful after you finish. So you need something that says, if we have this amount of attendees, then that was a successful event. If we have this amount of, or this percentage of employees retained in this particular division next year, that is a successful initiative that we have. If we are recruiting a certain amount of students or employees from this particular college fair or job fair, then this was successful because this is the amount that we've determined is successful. And then when we do the post-assessment, you will evaluate those things. So did you remain focused on the original commitment? And that's important to assess because sometimes we do get off track and people will throw different things into our hat or into our bag and it gets shaken up, and so then we do lose focus. So it's important to assess whether or not you remain focused. Did the efforts help solve the problem in any way? So also important to understand with DEI, we cannot fix centuries of things in one initiative. So it's important to see whether or not anything has been helped. Have you remedied anything with that initiative? Even if it is small, it is okay to consider a small success a success. Were the anticipated inputs sufficient? So did I have the resources that I needed in order to be successful? What is the evidence of intangible or tangible outcomes? So what evidence do I have to say this is what we did with this and this is how it was successful or this is how it was effective? And then your measures for success. So assessing your measures for success. Now, some ideas for using this would be for new and very specific initiatives. Again, making sure that you're being very specific so that you can stay focused. And then updating current initiatives. So this is not something that you have to start with a new initiative. If you have something that you've already tried before, you can use the post-assessment in order to see what was effective and what was not effective in order to tailor it or improve it and try it again if you would like to. Also, large-scale changes, so reorganizing different units within the organization or different offices, hiring new people to create a new office or something of that nature, new organizational policy development, all of these larger scale things you can use it for, and then when there's a small team responsible for change. So I had a conversation with Ms. Ferguson today, and we were talking about, she asked me, she said, do you have a big office? And I told her, I was like, no, it's just me. And so the reason why it's important to have a tool like this, if you have a small office, is because, again, you are identifying, or you will be identifying, who are the stakeholders or who are your key partners that you can work with as well. So this is something that you can pull people into in order to partner with so that it doesn't feel as overwhelming when you are a small team or a team of one. So these are some of the things that are ideal for using the logic model. So with the logic model, you can pull it out of your folders. So on the first page, there's your pre-assessment or your pre-planning tool, which is the actual DI model. So it's diversity, inclusion, and engagement, because this is also to engage your employees as well. So in that, you are identifying your key partners. So some examples of that are your full-time employees. Also are your customers. Can they be partners? Are you doing focus groups? Are they going to help you figure out what it is that you need to do? Your sponsors, how can they be pulled in to help with that as well? Any suppliers? Do you have suppliers that you can partner with in order to move an initiative forward? Government officials, it's important to get the government involved, especially if you are a nonprofit or educational institution. Community leaders, partner organizations, there are many different people that you can pull in if you have committees or task force within your organization, getting them activated to participate in the planning and implementation process of your plans. Key activities, so identifying what specific activities you'll be having in order to get to your goal. And these aren't activities like a party. These aren't necessarily activities like physical activities. These are more so like, what types of things are you going to be doing? So what is your recruitment going to be looking like? Who's going to be involved in that? Are you going to increase your recognition for employees so that you have a more inclusive environment that where employees feel valued? Legal policy development, all of these things, organizing employee resource groups, anything like that. What activities are you going to be doing? Identifying your key resources is important, so your financial, human, informational, spatial, all of those types of resources. Where is this going to be taking place? Who's going to be involved? What money do we have to put into it? Who can help organize this? If you have a small team, if you have a large team, who's responsible for what? Looking at your cost structure. So cost is important. What are the most important costs? So is it most important for compensation, for compensating the people who will be working on this, or paying for outside vendors, or paying for a specialist to come in, or a consultant? Where's the bulk of your cost going to be? And your die proposition, this is in the middle because this is what focuses all of those things in. It stays in the center. What commitments are you willing to make? Are you willing to make a commitment for creating a space of belonging? So are you committing to that? Are you committing to advocating for equitable practices? If so, then everything, your key partners, all of that should be focused on those equitable practices. Do you have an attorney who is involved in this process, or someone who is well-versed in legal matters related to human resources so that they can participate? And these are, of course, very specific to whatever your goal is, and going back to why we are developing this organizational change, that is where your die proposition will come from. Relationships, so what relationships will be fostered? Will it be the relationship with your employees that you're working to foster? Are you working to foster relationship with your consumers, or potential consumers or customers, or with government officials and partners? Channels are ways in which you are going to get this done. So are you going to create a task force? So once you've identified the people who can participate, are you going to create a task force, a committee? Are you going to activate your marketing teams who are not necessarily a part of the planning process, but they will need to be informed about what this new plan will be as well? Social media management, your policy implementers, who is going to be helping you carry out this plan? And then your partner segment, so who are we creating diversity, inclusion, and equity values for? The employees? Is it for customers? Is it for your community partners? Who is it for? Are you making an impact in the community or an internal impact? And then your intended outcome. So it sounds like a lot, but once you start putting this together, it helps tie everything together. So what we're going to do is we're going to try it. If you are here with someone who you work with in an organization, you're going to work with them. If not, just partner with the person who is closest to you and start discussing a potential initiative or potential organizational change that needs to happen. And then we'll talk about this in about, I'll give you, let's see, 5 minutes. It's a very realistic timeline. I think you all can do it. All right, so what was that like? How was it? It was fast. It was fast. It wasn't long enough. Of course, that's just a taste of what it would be like planning. And what I wanted you all to see is that this is a collaborative type of thing. This is not something that you want to develop by yourself. You want to do this with a team of people, even if they are not directly working in a DEI capacity within the organization, they can still be a part of it. Because something else that also takes place is the people who work in different units have different experiences, and so they can give information or insight to what the actual needs of the organization are. What was something that was really challenging about using the model? What was challenging?
For us, I felt like we were trying to answer questions in one of the boxes, and then it got us started on filling out parts of the other boxes, so we started kind of going around and when I was hearing you talk first, it's like, okay, we want to try to stay focused, and then, which to me implied a kind of a certain order or a certain flow, when I don't think it's as cut and dry as that assumption was.
No, it's not something that has to be very rigid in nature. The model itself is essentially to keep us focused on what the goal is, but it doesn't mean that you can hop around from box to box, because sometimes you will identify some people in a box and you'll say, and they also have resources that we can use for this. And they also, I know so-and-so works for them and they know someone else who does this. So it's okay to hop around in the boxes as long as that middle box is still the reason or the focus. What is the commitment? Are these people who we're identifying in all of these different boxes, is that still going to get us back to our intended result? Are we going to get to the outcome that we want to be in? I'm going to go ahead and jump us to the post-assessment so that you all have time for questions at the end. But the post-assessment is essentially the exact same thing, but looking at it from an after or hindsight view. What was actually needed? Who were our actual partners? Who was someone that I didn't initially think of as someone who would be a really good person to help out with this, but they ended up being a really good resource because they knew where all the bodies were. So who is someone that I didn't think of that had connections or a resource that I needed? So we wanted to put together this initiative, but we didn't even have any space for it. So what was something that I didn't consider before that I should have considered in that process? So it gives you an opportunity to, once again, try to hone in on and develop whatever it is that you are working on. And this is, again, this is an ongoing process. The thing about organizational change is that it takes years often for an organization to change. So I always like to use Reebok as an example because, or even Reebok and Champions, because those are two organizations that really do a good job of like reinventing themselves and then popping back out even stronger. So when I was growing up, Champions was $10 at Walmart. You can get anything, anything Champions branded at Walmart for about $10. And now Champions cost about $60 for a sweatshirt. And they did that because what they did was they were ongoing changing their organization. It took years. It wasn't something that happened over a short amount of time. It happened over development of years, and it was because they had an intentional plan, which is what happens with marketing. And the same thing is true for DEI. These aren't things that happen overnight, even though that's what the urgency for these changes are. But the change doesn't actually happen overnight. It takes an intentional and calculated plan, and it takes time for us to see those changes. So even if we are putting forth all of these efforts, don't expect overnight change. And again, going back to what I said before, those small victories are still victories. All right, so what questions do you all have? Are there any questions? Okay.
What advice do you have when your idea is just so big? And you said you talked about focusing on the small. I was telling my partner, I'm like, I have the big ideas. I don't know how to like find that small, you know,
Okay.
to focus on. So what's the strategy to make a big idea small?
Going back to looking at what is the purpose of the big idea? What outcome do you want from that big idea? Is the big idea you want world peace? Okay. So then thinking about, okay, I want world peace. In what areas do we, or what ways do we not have world peace? Okay, so we don't have world peace in terms of social media clapbacks or something like that. Like whatever the case may be. People are defensive. We have poverty. We have hunger. We have unhoused. So picking one of those. And then, okay, we have unhoused. What types of resources do unhoused people need? And then that funnels you down even more. Okay, now we know that they may need addresses in order to get a position to work, or they may need certain clothing or whatever the resources may be. Are we looking at urgent resources or long-term resources? And then that funnels you even further down. So taking those big ideas and then finding out what is actually needed, or like really giving it some thought, so that it takes time to think of those things as well. That's a good question though.
I have more of a comment, and kind of go with one of the arrows that you have in the last model regarding priorities. So it feels like with a lot to make change at university level. When you're at a smaller level and you may not have the financial or human resources to make change, how does the logic model help if you still can't move it forward because you don't have the resources? So I guess the comment really is as I'm processing this aloud, if it's a priority, you have to make it a priority. Right?
Yeah. So you still have to, if it's a priority, you still have to get things done, right? And sometimes you may not have the human resources that you need. For that particular role that I'm in the college, I am an office of one, and I'm still held accountable for the work that I do. So the work doesn't stop because it's just me. But one thing that does help is having a logic model helps me stay focused, and it also helps me explain back to people that what I'm doing is strategic management. What I'm doing is not changing how people feel about each other. I'm making structural changes and strategic changes within the organization, and that takes time. I think emphasizing that back to the people who hold me accountable, having that logic model and saying, these are the things that I'm working on, these are the people who I'm able to pull in. However, they may be faculty members who also have a large teaching load. They're working on a research project, a grant project, and so they don't have the same time to devote to it that someone who's fully dedicated to DEI in my college would have. But it doesn't change the fact that I'm still accountable, but it does help me explain and give some context to the people who are wanting that urgent change. So I think that that's kind of the purpose of the logic model, is to show this is work that's being done. I'm having to pull in these people. They have limited resources as well in terms of time, but the work is still being done. It will just take longer. And I would use that as leverage to get someone who can work with you.
Yeah, I was just going to make a similar comment that in addition to the planning and the assessment, I think it would be a great tool for reporting on progress.
Right.
So if you're not getting the outcome, if the outcomes aren't there,
Right.
then that means something's missing.
Right.
You make the argument.
Yeah. Okay, I got my time thing, so she's doing the Sandman, sweeping me off the stage. Thank you all for your time and for participating. I appreciate you.